everyone, welcome back to the show. Today we are going...
Back in time.
Yeah, back in time. Kind of. We're doing a deep dive into the Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus.
Ooh, a classic.
Yeah. Released back in 2018, and using this article from rechargemytopup.com, we're going to be looking at some of the features.
And seeing how they stack up today.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's amazing how much technology changes just in a few short years.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It really is. So what's first on the list for this deep dive?
Well, let's start with the display. The S9 Plus had a 6.2-inch Super AMOLED screen with a resolution of 2960 by 1440 pixels.
Wow. So that means that even back then you were getting some seriously crisp and vibrant images. AMOLED technology is known for those deep blacks and wide viewing angles.
Right. So watching a movie on this phone back in 2018 must have been a pretty great experience.
Oh, yeah. Especially compared to other phones at the time. Plus, remember, this is also when those taller screens were becoming popular.
The article mentions it has an 18.5.9 aspect ratio.
Yeah, that color aspect ratio is perfect for multitasking.
Makes sense.
Scrolling through social media and watching videos without those black bars. It was a big step towards the immersive experience we have today.
Okay, I remember that. And then they also had the Corning Gorilla Glass 5.
Right.
Which I remember was a big deal for durability back then.
Oh, yeah, it was. And it also had HDR support, which was starting to become a thing back then, but wasn't in every phone.
So you were getting a much better picture.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Much wider range of colors and better contrast in videos.
So basically better picture overall than a lot of the other phones.
For sure.
So let's look under the hood now.
All right. Let's see what we've got.
The S9 Plus ran on a Qualcomm Snapdragon 845 processor with 6 GB of RAM.
Okay. That's pretty impressive for 2018.
Yeah. What did that mean for the user back then?
Well, basically, you could do pretty much anything you wanted. You could edit 4K video, play graphics, intensive games, multitask like crazy, and the phone would just keep up.
Wow.
It was a real powerhouse for a smartphone back then.
So it wasn't just about fancy specs. You could actually handle some pretty serious tasks.
Awesome.
And then what about storage? That was a time when cloud storage wasn't as prevalent as it is today.
Oh, yeah. You're right. The S9 Plus came with either 64 or 128 gigabytes of internal storage.
Oh, okay.
Plus, you could even expand it with a microSD card.
Nice.
So that gave users a lot of flexibility. It's a good reminder that while cloud storage is super convenient, sometimes you just need to have that local storage option.
Right. Let's move on to everyone's favorite feature.
Oh, you mean?
The camera.
The camera, yes.
It had a dual camera system with a 12MP main camera and a 12MP telephoto lens.
Nice.
But here's the thing that I thought was really cool. The variable aperture on the main camera.
Oh, yeah. That was a pretty innovative feature at the time.
Yeah, it could switch between f1.5 and f2.4.
It was really ahead of its time. Imagine trying to take a picture in like a dimly lit restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
The wider f1.5 aperture would let in way more light, so you'd end up with a much brighter and clearer image.
That's really cool.
Then when you're out in the bright daylight, you could switch to the narrower f2.4 for sharper details.
So you didn't need to be a photography expert to get a good shot.
Exactly. It gave users a level of control that you just didn't see in a lot of smartphones back then.
And on top of that, it could record 4K video at 60 frames per second.
Oh, yeah. That was cutting edge for the time.
That must have been a game changer for people who were just starting to use their phones to make videos.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It really opened up possibilities for mobile filmmaking and vlogging.
And of course, for all the selfie lovers out there, it had an 8MP front-facing camera.
Yeah, pretty standard for 2018.
All right, so let's talk software.
Sure.
The S9 Plus shipped with Android 8.0.
Oreo. Right.
What was that Android version like?
It was a pretty big upgrade from the previous versions.
That
It introduced some cool features like picture-in-picture mode.
And I remember that.
You could watch videos while you were doing other things.
Nice.
You also got notification channels to help you control those annoying alerts.
Okay.
And best of all, improved battery life.
Woo. Everyone loves that.
But here's what's even more impressive. The S9 Plus was eligible for updates all the way up to Android 11.
Wow. That's a really good lifespan for software support.
Oh, yeah. Especially compared to some manufacturers these days.
That's true. And I can't talk about a Samsung phone without mentioning Bixby and Samsung Pay and all those other Samsung features.
Right.
Were those as integrated back then as they are now?
Well, Samsung was definitely building out its ecosystem. They were still finding their footing with things like Bixby.
Okay.
And Samsung Pay was starting to gain some traction as a mobile payment option.
Yeah. Makes sense.
It's cool to see how those features have evolved over time.
Yeah, so we've covered a lot of ground already, but we're not done yet. We're going to be taking a look at even more of the S9 Plus's features after the break, and discuss what they all tell us about how technology and our expectations of it have changed in just a few short years. All right, so we're back, and we're still talking about the S9 Plus.
This phone is packed with features.
It really is. And one that you mentioned earlier is that 4K video recording at 60 frames per second.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That was a huge deal back in 2018.
I mean, before this phone and a few other high-end phones shooting high-quality video on a smartphone was pretty much unheard of.
Right. It just wasn't a thing.
So the S9 Plus really kind of paved the way for mobile video creation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It gave people the ability to create really professional-looking videos without having to lug around a bunch of equipment.
Yeah. Now it's pretty much standard on any smartphone.
It's amazing how quickly features like that become commonplace.
And it makes you wonder what features from today will be considered retro in a few years.
It's hard to say, but it's fun to think about.
So the article also mentions that the S9 Plus had stereo speakers tuned by AKG.
Yeah.
With Dolby Atmos.
For a richer audio experience?
Was that something that was common on smartphones back then?
Not really. Having high-quality stereo speakers on a smartphone was still a bit of a novelty back then.
So if you were watching a movie or listening to music on the S9 Plus,
oh yeah,
you would have had a much better experience than with most other phones.
Definitely. The stereo speakers and Dolby Atmos would have made a huge difference.
And of course, we can't forget about battery life and durability.
Right.
Oh.
Those were becoming increasingly important.
The S9 Plus had a 3500 mAh battery, which was pretty big for the time.
It also offered fast charging and wireless charging.
Which is super convenient.
Yeah.
Exactly. And on top of that, it had an IP68 rating for water and dust resistance.
Oh, wow.
So you could basically take it anywhere.
Yeah. It could handle a splash or two.
Was that a common feature back then?
It was starting to become more common, but not all phones had it.
So that must have been a big selling point for people who wanted that extra peace of mind.
Definitely. It was a big deal for a lot of people.
Especially if you were using your phone in like outdoors or in more active settings.
Exactly.
And all of that was wrapped up in that sleek metal and glass design.
With that curved glass back.
Oh, yeah. That was all the rage back then.
It's funny how phone designs go through so many different trends.
Yeah. What's old is new again and all that.
Exactly. It's interesting to see how aesthetics and functionality kind of evolve together.
So where do you think the S9 Plus fits in when you look back at smartphone history?
I think it's safe to say that it was a pretty pivotal device. It pushed the boundaries in terms of camera technology, display quality, and overall performance.
Yeah.
I mean, it really set a new standard for what a flagship smartphone could be.
And even though it might seem a bit dated by today's standards,
yeah,
it's clear that it left a lasting impact on the industry.
Oh, absolutely. It paved the way for so many features that we take for granted today.
That's so true. So as technology keeps evolving, it just makes you wonder what features we have now will be considered retro in just a few short years.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It's a tech guessing game, I guess.
Trying to predict the future.
That's right. All right. So we're going to wrap up this deep dive, but before we go, I want to leave you with a question to think about.
Okay.
If you were to compare the S9 Plus with a flagship smartphone that came out today, which features from the S9 Plus would still be considered top tier?
Ooh, that's a good one.
And what does that tell us about what we value in technology?
That's really interesting. I think we all need to ask ourselves that.
Absolutely. So we hope you enjoyed this trip down memory lane as we explored the Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus. It just goes to show that even though technology is always changing, that search for the next big innovation never stops.
That's for sure.
Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Welcome back to the show. We've been taking this deep dive into the Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus.
Quite a trip down memory lane.
Yeah. And, we've talked about the display and that camera system and all the things that made this phone so innovative back in 2018.
Right.
But what does it all really mean for us as tech users?
That's a good question.
What can we learn from looking back at a phone like the S9 Plus?
I think one thing that really stands out is how much our needs and expectations have shifted in such a short amount of time.
Yeah.
Things we considered essential back then.
Right.
They might be totally commonplace today.
Or even gone.
Yeah, exactly. Like, think about the headphone jack.
Oh, yeah. The S9 Plus had one.
But these days, they're getting harder and harder to find.
That's true. And that just shows you how our habits have changed.
Right. How we listen to music now is completely different.
Yeah. Totally. So it makes you wonder what other features we think are must-haves today might disappear in the future.
It's like a guessing game.
Totally. Trying to predict the future of tech.
Exactly. But I think that's why it's so interesting to look at older devices like this one.
Yeah, I agree.
It helps us understand how technology evolves and how, what consumers want really drives innovation.
Yeah. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the S9 Plus, I have one final question for you listening out there.
Okay.
Think back to all the things we talked about today about this phone.
Okay.
If you were to compare the S9 Plus to a flagship smartphone that was just released today,
Okay.
what features from the S9 Plus would still hold up? You know, which ones would still be considered like top of the line?
That's a really interesting question.
Yeah. And I think what's even more interesting is what that tells us about what we truly value when it comes to technology.
Right. What really matters to us.
Yeah, exactly. So we hope you enjoyed this journey back in time with us. It's fascinating to see how far we've come in such a short time.
It really is amazing.
And even though technology is constantly changing that quest for innovation and, you know, making our lives better through tech, that's something that never goes out of style.
Absolutely. That's the constant.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.